5 addresses, 90 seconds. 4 of them are occupied. We will come back to the 5th one. First, you need Sunday. Because everything that happens at 6 o'clock on Monday morning was already decided by 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, and not by anybody holding a warrant. She noticed the car outside a petrol station on the Sunday morning, and she noticed it for the least dramatic reason imaginable, which is that it was the wrong kind of clean. It stayed 3 back for 11 miles. She took 4 turns she did not need to take. It took 3 of them. The one it did not take, it did not need to take, because it came back onto her 2 junctions later, from a road that only works if you already know where somebody's going. That is the moment she stopped thinking about the freeze order. A freeze order is a piece of paper. A car 3 back on a Sunday morning is a decision somebody has made about you personally, and by the time she reached the ring road, she had understood the difference completely. She went down into an underground car park in the middle of the city, which is the correct thing to do, and also an admission that you have run out of ideas. 3 levels down. She left the car on level 3 with the keys in it, took the bag, walked up 2 flights, and went out through the pedestrian exit onto a shopping street on a Sunday afternoon with 400 people on it. And she got away with it. Probably. That is the honest version, and it is worse than either certainty would have been. She never found out whether she lost him in that car park, or whether he simply stopped following her. Because somebody had made a telephone call, and he no longer needed to, she spent the rest of that day assuming the first one. The flat was a service let above a dry cleaner's, taken in a name that had never been used for anything else, and she had never slept in it. That was the point of it. It existed so that there would be one address in the world that had never appeared beside her name. She let herself in at 2:30 on the Sunday afternoon. The kettle was warm, not hot. Warm. The temperature of a kettle is about 20 minutes after somebody has boiled it and not made anything with it. The expected version of this scene is a woman arriving somewhere after a man has been and gone, finding the traces of him, and understanding that she is not safe. That is not this scene. He came back. She heard the street door while she was still standing in the kitchen, and there was nowhere to go except the bathroom. And the bathroom door did not close properly, and it had never closed properly, and she stood behind it in a 2-inch gap for 19 minutes. There is a commercial records warehouse on a business park about 12 miles out, where the operation had put 7 years of physical files under a company name that stopped trading in 2021. 40 ranks of gray archive boxes, 4 meters high. She had an hour before the building locked for the night. The lighting in a building like that is on motion sensors, banked in groups of 6 aisles on a 90-second timer, which means she can see exactly where he is, and it means he can see exactly where she is. She was at the far end when a bank came on behind her at the front of the building, and nobody else was booked in. She went back and looked at the sign-in tablet from behind a rank, and found one name above hers, signed in 11 minutes earlier. So she worked out the rule, and she started moving only when he moved, traveling inside the noise of his own footsteps, freezing every time his bank timed out and the building went black again. Then she did something clever. She threw a box 3 ranks over, and a bank came on where she was not, and he went to it. And this is the thing about him, and it is the whole character in one image. He did not hurry. He walked to it at precisely the pace he had already been walking. He was not chasing anybody. He was working through a building. She got up into the racking, onto a middle shelf, behind a row of boxes. He walked the aisle underneath her. He stopped. He tilted a box out, read the label, put it back square, and moved on. And then he did the thing that broke her. He went to the one rank she needed, and he stood still. He let the lights time out around him, and he stood there in the dark and waited. Because he understood that building exactly as well as she did, and he knew that the next bank of lights to come on anywhere in it would be hers. She lay on a metal shelf in the dark for 14 minutes. At 6 o'clock, the air handling system cycled and tripped a bank at the far wall, and he moved toward it, and she ran. And he ran. It is the only time in this film that he does. Down the ranks, with the lights firing on behind her in sequence, like something following her down the building. A fire door on the alarm, a loading yard, a low wall, a verge, a park and ride, and a shuttle bus pulling in. She got on it. He stopped at the curb. He did not board, and the reason he did not board is the reason he is frightening. A vehicle with cameras on it and a driver who will remember your face is not something his job permits. He watched it pull out, straightened his coat, and walked back the way he had come, at his ordinary pace. She lost the bag over the wall in the loading yard. Everything she had chosen to save from the fire on Friday night. The third of it she had stood in the rain to keep. He picked it up. He opened it. He read 2 pages of it, and he put it back down on the ground and left it there. She went back for it at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was exactly where he had put it. Untouched, wet through. That is how she found out what her choice on Friday had actually been worth to anybody. Nobody ordered the contract. That is not a technicality, and it is not a way of letting anybody off. It is the mechanism, and it is the coldest thing in this entire series. Saurav Bhatt had 3 clients. For 6 years they had never spoken to one another, because the whole value of Saurav was that they did not have to. In the last week of it, they started comparing notes directly, the way frightened people do, and within a few days they had established one fact between them. There was exactly one document in existence that named all 3 of them, and it was in a Woolies book. None of them ever said what they wanted done. Not one of them said a word about it out loud, because not one of them had said anything out loud in 6 years. So Saurav did what Saurav has always done, which is pass a message on. One line, flat, no verb in it at all. He had been phrasing things that way since 2019, deliberately, as a matter of professional pride, precisely so that nothing he ever sent could be read as an instruction. And on the other end of it, there is an intake desk. And an intake desk exists to convert inbound queries into job records. A reference number was generated. A file already existed, so no approval was sought. A contractor was assigned by Rhoda, and nobody paid for it either. There was a standing recovery retainer that had been running since 2019, set up by the operation, expensed monthly, never once reviewed, and never canceled. The man walking those aisles was a subscription that nobody had remembered to stop. They brought Saurav in on the Sunday evening. Not because of a Wooly, because his name was on page 4 of the folder, the one page Sabrina photographed. He was helpful. He was helpful for 4 hours. He explained his structures, he explained his fee arrangements, he offered corrections to things nobody had asked about, and he was the single most cooperative person in this entire story, because cooperation had always been the product. Then somebody put his own sentence on the table in front of him. One line, printed on a single sheet. He read it. He said that he had written it. He said it was a request for information. They asked him to read it again. He read it again, out loud this time, slowly, in the voice of a man doing somebody a favor. And then he stopped and looked at it. And for about 6 seconds, you can watch him searching that sentence for the instruction. And he cannot find it. He is not performing. That is the part to hold on to. There genuinely is no instruction in it. He built his entire professional life around making certain there would never be one. He succeeded completely. The thing he built worked exactly as designed. And it put a man in a warehouse with a folder. He went home that night. He was never charged with anything connected to it. Nobody has ever told him what that sentence did, and there is nobody left alive with any reason to. So, 5 doors, 6 o'clock on Monday morning. The first is a bench in a back room where Solomon Katz had valued other people's property for 40 years, and he did not get up when they came in, because at 68, he had been expecting some version of this since he was 30. The second is the client they had known about for a year and had never been able to touch. The third is an accountant who begins helping before the door is fully open. The fourth is a woman with proof, who has been keeping it in a drawer for 11 months in case a morning exactly like this one ever arrived. The fifth door was already open, not forced, open. The flat was empty, and it had been empty for something under 9 hours, and there was a chair pulled out from a table. And on the table there was a small rectangle of dust, where something had been sitting for a long time and was no longer sitting there. Priya Raman stood in that room for a while. She had built that list herself, over 11 months, out of nothing. 5 addresses. She had never given it to anybody outside the room. And somebody had been to the 5th one first. She wrote it up as a leak, because leak is the only category the form has, and there is no box on any form anywhere for the truth of it. Which is that 2 completely unconnected people spent that weekend working from the same list, without either of them ever knowing the other one existed. Because both lists came out of the same folder. Levi Adler was 29 years old and had about $1.5 million, and by that Sunday night he had nothing left that anybody wanted. He had spent 6 years being useful. Not brave, not clever. Useful. He had a handler and a payment schedule and a signature block on a folder. And the arrangement had worked so completely that he had genuinely stopped being able to tell the difference between people who wanted to protect him and people who wanted to find him. So when somebody knocked at 11 o'clock at night, he opened the door. That is what 6 years of being handled does to a man. It is not stupidity. It is that he had spent his entire adult life being told when to be frightened, and there was nobody left to tell him. That is all you see, and it is all you get. What we know is administrative. 3 of his accounts stopped moving on the Monday. His handler's file was closed in the spring with a category code and no narrative. He is not on any list of the dead, and he is not on any list of the living either. And the last person to see him for certain was a man who was never identified. He was not punished. Nobody in this story is ever punished. He was finished, which is a great deal worse. And it took about 4 seconds at a door, he opened himself. At 20 to 9 on Monday morning, she was sitting in a car in the corner of a retail park, with the engine off, watching a phone. Somebody knocked on the window. Not hard. 2 knuckles, twice, the way somebody knocks when they are about to ask whether you've got a moment. She wound it down about 4 inches. He did not lean in. He stood beside the door with a folder held against his chest, and he asked her one question, which was where the book was. And she told him the truth, that it had burned in a metal bin off a ring road at 11:30 on Friday night, 3 days earlier, that she had done it herself, in the rain, that there was nothing left of it at all. He stood there for a moment, and he believed her. That is the whole of it. He was never sent for her. He was sent for the book, and a woman with nothing left to hand over is worth less alive than the paperwork it would take to explain her afterwards. Then his phone went. He answered it and listened for about 11 seconds, and said the only thing he says in this entire film, which is, "Understood. I'll close it off." He stopped at the far end of the car park and stood beside his own car for a minute, typing on the phone with one thumb, filing his expenses. Because a job that has been called off is not a reprieve, and it is not a mercy. It is an administrative event, and there is a form for it. It was called off at 22 minutes to 9, 3 minutes before he knocked on her window. And it was not called off by a client, or by a lawyer, or by anybody who had any authority whatsoever in any part of this. Levi Adler had left a folder on a kitchen table 3 weeks earlier. On the inside of the cover, printed in 6-point type at the bottom of a compliment slip, there was a company name, a reference number, and an intake telephone number. Because that is how vendors work, and vendors are consistent. Sabrina Grant rang it at 8:37 on Monday morning. She quoted the reference number. She said one sentence, which was that the matter under that reference was withdrawn. And the desk canceled the job. They canceled it because the reference matched. That is all cancellation has ever required, from anybody, at any point in 6 years. Not authority, not identity. A number, read out correctly, by somebody who had it. The woman on that desk did not ask who she was. Nobody at any point in this story has ever asked anybody who they were, which is the reason the whole thing was possible in the first place. Owuli does not know this happened. She will never know it happened. For the rest of her life, she will believe that a man stood beside her car and decided not to, and that she talked her way out of it. And that will be one of 2 or 3 things she holds on to. The markets opened at 9. She watched it happen on a phone, in a car, in a retail park, over 4 minutes. The accounts did not close dramatically. They resolved. One after another, they went from a number to a status, and the status was the same on all of them, and the whole thing took less time than it takes to boil a kettle. Because 6 years of extremely careful work can be undone by a Friday afternoon signature and a Monday morning batch process, and always could have been. She was arrested at 11 o'clock, on foot, near a bus station, and she did not run. And this is where you understand what this series has been about. Because none of these people are ever punished. Punishment requires somebody to be paying attention. Priya Raman closed the case and got it about 90% right. And the 10% she missed, she will never know about. And she will never find out that the whole thing began because somebody aimed her at a file without telling her why, which is precisely what was done to Sabrina Grant for 5 years, done again by the one person on earth who knew exactly what it felt like, in complete good faith. Sourav Bhatt walked away smaller and was never told. Levi Adler had no names left to trade, and nobody left who would take his calls. Marisol Duran is a car on a verge with the doors open. The man in the good coat closed a file and went on to the next one, and nobody ever established who he was, because nobody ever looked, because there was no form for it. And Owuli, who kept the true numbers beside the false ones for 6 years, and who was left alone that entire time for exactly one reason, which is that she was the only copy, was undone by the arithmetic of that. The moment a second copy of her existed, she stopped being untouchable and started being a loose end, at the same instant, out of the same fact. Her protections and her destruction were the same object all along. She was not betrayed by an enemy. Nobody in 6 years of this ever was.